Hello friends, today we're recording another video. We haven't posted anything in quite some time, and today's video may be an unusual topic for a video which you don't often find on YouTube, and that video is books on dog training. You will say, well, if I'm watching a video and I can see it done through a video, why do I need to read a book if I can see it done on video? And you're right, there's literally hundreds and hundreds of videos on YouTube where you can see a professional trainer showing you a trained dog that demonstrates a routine. However, there's a lot of controversy these days about the so-called pure positive trainers, and you will see videos where a person does this and this and this kind of cutesy stuff. I'm not going to name him by name, I think you know who I mean. And he had a vlog war recently with one of the Schutzhund trainers that I follow, and if you're on this channel, you are into dog sports and you're into obedience training, and so I think you know who I mean. I don't want to refer to other people's channels because I feel that I leave that up to the viewers' discretion to figure it out for themselves. Before I go on, let me ask you a quick favor to hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you're notified when new videos come, because the YouTube algorithm does not know who's watching this channel unless you subscribe and hit that notification bell. I checked the back page of the website, and a lot more people watch the videos than subscribe. So if you could please hit that subscribe button, it would really help us out. So today's topic will be, well, where does this all begin? Where did the topics of purely positive training, correction-based training, a mix of the two, which is called balanced training in today's parlance, where did all this begin? In training a dog, you're following some kind of methodology. Whether you're following purely positive training, you're following correction-based training, or a mix of the two, the theory behind your method came from somewhere, right? And so before we had internet, before we had YouTube, before we had anything web-based, how did people learn to train dogs all over the world? People read books. And there is still a lot of benefit to revisiting books in today's times. Even though you really can't learn dog training through books, you have to see it hands-on. You probably have to work with a professional trainer if you want to do competitive obedience, as opposed to simple sit down, come, and all those basic commands. If you want to do competitive healing and you want to compete in a high-level dog sport, you probably need to work with a trainer or be part of a club, and you need to be shown how it's done. So reading a book, I'm not conceited enough to think that you're going to learn dog training from reading books. Although what I will say is that what has worked 50 or 60 years ago, although the techniques have been surpassed in today's times, can still work today. If it worked 50, 60 years ago, the same method can be applied today and with good results if applied intelligently. So let's begin our lesson on dog training by focusing on books specific to not just dogs in general, but training obedience and training protection dogs, as opposed to books on obedience only. So I'm going to first show you some of the books I'm going to talk about. Purely Positive Training with Sheila Booth. Der Schutzhund by the master himself, Dr. Helmut Reiser. Very small book, but I'm going to talk about it. The Dog Training Manual by Colonel Conrad Most. Schutzhund Training and Methods by Susan Barwig and Stafford Hillard. This book here. And of course, an advanced version of the same topic by none other than Ivan Balabanov and Kara Duet. This book here, and the book I don't have in front of me, but I have it somewhere in my library, is the book by William Koehler. And of course, how can you talk about dog training if you don't mention Schutzhund and the man who was responsible for creating the German Shepherd, Captain Max von Stephanitz himself, and the Book of the German Shepherd, which was translated from German in 1925. Remember, the breed was created in 1899, so in 1925 the breed was only 26 years old, which is not a very long time. So he had a lot to say about keeping the German Shepherd a working breed, and to keep the dog as a working dog, you have to have a test by which you will selection test dogs, and for that you need to create a criteria for a test, and you have to have a testing methodology. So you have to have a training method. You see what I'm saying? So you can't do one without the other. So let's go back in time. I'm going to put a link in the description to an Amazon link to some of these books, and the ISBN number. I will list that also, because if you don't want to pay for the book, you can go to your local library, give them your ISBN number, and they might have it on file. It might be another way for you to search it. This is not a sponsored video. I'm not getting anything from Amazon as a paid promotion. This is strictly for your benefit and for your edification as to dog training. So, how did dog training begin? Well, the first thing you need to understand in dog training is, how do you train an animal which does not have human intelligence? To train an animal, you have to make the animal understand in the animal's brain what you're teaching, at a level the animal understands at his level of intellect, as opposed to your level of intellect, which is as a human being. So the first question we must ask ourselves is, what is learning? What is learning theory? And F.B. Skinner, look him up, he's a very famous psychologist, actually. The question is, what is learning? So in a human being, learning is the acquisition of knowledge. That is what learning is for a human being. In an animal, learning is a set of associations developed through positive and negative reinforcement, reinforced over time until the behavior becomes reliable. So what we call learning in human beings, which is the acquisition of knowledge through understanding and reasoning, is not the same way animals learn, which is through associative reasoning, association, not by reasoning. So what we first must understand is what is learning from an animal point of view versus a human point of view, and they're not the same thing. Although if your child ever touches a hot stove and burns their hand, they will never touch a hot stove again. That is associative learning through association. So the first person to come up with a model of training dogs was William Koehler. I believe he wrote a manual, an army training manual, in World War I. And his methodology, people consider it yank and crank today, but back then it was revolutionary, because there was no written mechanism that people taught dogs, where there was a system written out, what to do first, what to do second, what to do third. And he came to the picture devising a system of training. Now, whether you agree with it or not, remember, we're living in 2024. We're not living in 1910 or 1920. So what is considered inhumane today was considered very humane 100 years ago. Society changes and society evolves. So what we consider difficult methods to follow back at that time would be considered non-difficult, very humane method in the 1910, 1920 time period. World War I was, as you know, 1914 to 1918. So what is the method? Well, the method involves training a dog out of drive. See, there's training a dog in drive, which is motivational obedience. And the dog is very happy when it's working. It has a very good fluidity. It's bouncy, it's happy, it carries its ears up. It doesn't slink down, having its ears down because it feels submissive. It's not taught through corrections. It's taught in a very happy-go-lucky manner through food rewards and toy rewards. And that is a very modern way of training dogs. But back in 1910, 1914, that's not how dogs were taught. You wanted a dog to sit, you would push on its rump while yanking up on its prong collar on its neck, and the dog was taught sit, and the dog sat. Now, of course, if we did it to an adult dog, he may have pushed back with his back legs. It's called opposition reflex, because the dog will resist you pushing his rump down. And you had to forcefully get it down, and then the dog was seen as being non-compliant on purpose. And therefore the idea of dominance theory came in. And it wasn't dominance theory, it was simply the dog didn't understand what you wanted from him. So you would pull up on the neck, on the leash, push down on the tail, on the rump, and the dog would sit. If you wanted to go into a down, you would yank the dog down, put your foot on it, and the dog would be yanked down by its neck, and the dog went down, and you would say the down command, and the dog would, through repetition, would learn to down. This was correction-based training, and the dog is taught through an adversive method. To avoid getting a correction, it must beat the correction to the punch. In other words, it must do the behavior before it gets the correction to avoid getting the correction. It is a form of escape avoidance training. It is trying to escape or avoid the correction. Today's e-collar training, although done with very low level stimulation and not like it was done in the 80s where the collars were truly shock collars. Today we have much more advanced techniques and much more advanced tools. Those tools weren't around in 1910 or 1914. So people used quite a bit of force in training dogs, and only very strong dogs, I don't mean physically strong, I mean emotionally strong, were able to handle these methods. Dogs which would be overly submissive or urinate on themselves would not be able to be trained this way. And so strong dogs were more prevalent, and methods were harsher. So the correction-based approach still works, and there is still a place for it, believe it or not, although it sounds harsh to say that. Let me clarify what I mean. The way to train a dog is to take it through a learning phase, followed by a proofing phase where it learns the same command in a distracting environment around other people or dogs, and you gradually build distractions until the dog understands to obey the command absolutely despite distractions. Then you must teach the command to be reliable, and only after the dog has had a lot of repetitions can the dog then be given corrections. This is a deviation from the earlier method, Koehler method, where you teach it through corrections in the first place. This is a revision where you're teaching it positively through food lures and word association. Then you correct once the dog understands the behavior. This is a very different way than the Koehler method where you correct to teach the behavior. So in proofing a dog, you're using corrections to make the behavior reliable, but you're not using corrections at the forefront of the training. You'll preload the training with a lot of positive experiences and a lot of positive reinforcement first to build, imagine a banking account where you're making deposits of money. That deposit of money is positive feelings toward training and toward you, the trainer, which you are the owner, therefore you're also the trainer. Once you have a bank full of money and deposits have been saved, then you can add corrections, but you have created already a big balance of positive. So taking away with a small negative doesn't hurt your overall bank balance. I'm making an analogy using money because I think it illustrates the point. So the next person that we're going to discuss, which is a deviation from Koehler, is Colonel Conrad Most. I don't know if you can see that. And as you can see, it's called Colonel Conrad Most because he was a colonel in the army. And this book was written in 1910 in Germany and translated into English. What's special about this book, if you read it in English, remember this book was written in 1910. So this is not, although this is a new book, it's a reprint of something originally written in 1910. What the book goes through is the recall, the jump, the downstay. It talks about protection training, bite work, heeling on lead. What's interesting about this book is that he talks about compulsion, but he also talks about primary and secondary reinforcers. For example, a food reward or a toy reward can be a primary reinforcer, and verbal praise by the owner. Good boy, good boy. Use your voice. You know, your voice is very powerful to the animal. Using a powerful voice of complimenting the dog that it's doing it right is critical in training an animal, because the dog looks to work for praise. The dog is looking for your approval. So this idea of primary reinforcers and then followed by secondary reinforcers, this was written in 1910, 50 years before F.B. Skinner's revolutionary work on marker training, which some people call clicker training. This is written 50 or 60 years before F.B. Skinner's learning theory. And he writes about primary and secondary reinforcers. The book is not exclusively based on correction training. The book does talk about food as a reward system. The book leans more heavily toward corrections than you would find in today's mechanisms. But remember, this is written in 1910. I feel this book is still a hell of a read if you want to go into learning theory of how animals were trained. And this method, written in the U.S. Army Manual, it was translated in the U.S. from German. Because it was translated by the British, they referred to the German Shepherd as the Alsatian, because there was a war with Germany in 1914 to 1918, and there was another war with Germany in 1939 to 1945, if you count the attack on Poland as the beginning of the war, or if you count the attack on the Soviet Union. The war started in 1940. So it's either a 5-year-long war or a 6-year-long war, depending on how you count the beginning of World War II. World War II happened 20 years after World War I. So there was a lot of negative feelings toward Germans, and not to create a negative feeling toward their breed, the German Shepherd, which was used by the Allies as well, not just by Germans. They called the German Shepherd the Alsatian. So you will find in this book they refer to the dogs as here the dog is being asked to retrieve a pistol found on the ground. I don't know if you can see that picture, but the dog is holding a pistol in its mouth. The dog is taught how to jump over an obstacle. A lot of what this book writes about is actually not really wrong. It's still pretty correct today. I mean, the man really understood dogs. So this book is from 1910, and this is an updated 1954 edition. What is written in this book was the method for 50 years in dog training. 50 years is based on this book. You can't ignore this book if you want to understand dog training. This was the manual by which dogs were trained for 50 years in every country in the world. So you can't ignore the work of Colonel Conrad Most and what he did in dog training. As we headed into the modern era, we wanted to adopt more positive training techniques. And one of the most difficult things to teach a German Shepherd, because in the 70s, 60s, and 80s, we didn't really see Malinois in dog sports. We just saw German Shepherds. Occasionally you saw Rottweilers in the late 80s, but it was a sport dominated by German Shepherds. And remember, the show lines and working lines were not that far apart in the 1970s, 60s, and 50s as they are today. So a working dog or a show line dog were all German Shepherds and all could work. So the training of obedience, sit down and come, and then the drop on recall, the send away, the flip finish from the front into the heel position. There was plenty of AKC knowledge of how to train obedience. One of the things people lacked knowledge of was how do you train protection. Now remember, there was no videos you could order, and you have a VHS tape. Remember, this is before DVDs. People had VHS. For those of you who are over 30, you will know there was such a thing as VHS cassettes. If you're under 30, or you are only 30 and you were an 80s baby born in the late 1980s, you will not know what VHS is, or you might. But before we had DVDs, we had something called VHS. Thus, I don't know, people watching, I don't know your age, so I'm just letting you know. So in the late 80s, we started having VHS cassettes come to your home. You could put it into your VCR, and you could watch a video of how to train dogs. One of the best videos I've seen, and this is not an endorsement that I'm being paid for, this is just my own opinion. Learberg had VHS tapes. Mr. Ed Frawley, I'm sure you know this channel very well. It's been around for a very, very long time. I ordered VHS tapes from that company, and they were very good. But what did you do before you could order a VHS tape of how to train dogs, both in protection and obedience? So if you were living in the 1960s or 1970s, before VHS tapes became around, remember in the 1970s there were no VCR players. And in the 1950s is when television was invented. So in the 1940s there was no television, there was only radio. But those who don't know, television was only invented by Edward Zworykin in the 1950s. So prior to the 1950s, television didn't exist, in case you didn't know that. So how do you want to train dogs if there's no television, there's no video cassettes, there's no video demonstration of how to train the dog in protection? Well, people train dogs all over the world kind of brutally. You would, there's two drives in a dog: avoidance or fight. If a dog sees there's no way to win, and an attacker is coming at him with a whip or a stick that is going to whip him and hurt him, he has one of two choices. He can either run away and go into avoidance, or he can counterattack the aggressor and go into aggression. So the way to train dogs in protection was to provoke aggression. And those dogs which had good nerves and didn't go into avoidance were then trained through aggression. That's how dogs were trained. By being hit, the dog would become angry and aggress against the opponent. This is not a very good way to train protection, because you're making the dog suspicious and you're making the dog angry and you're hurting the dog. But in the World War I to World War II era, all the way to the 50s, 60s, this is how dogs were trained. There was no systematic approach of training protection. Along comes Dr. Helmut Reiser. I think Ivan Balabanov had an interview with him. And this book, I think, was written in 1996. It's called Der Schutzhund. You see Dr. Helmut Reiser? And there are photographs in this book. And your helper is the person who develops the dog in protection, not the obedience coach, but the bite coach, for lack of a better term. The way you train in a more scientific way is to teach the dogs the mechanics of biting in prey drive, where the rag provokes the dog's prey drive, the helper runs away and pretends to be scared of the dog to build up the dog's confidence. So the helper has to be a good actor in order to build up the dog's confidence that it's chasing away the bad guy. And that takes somebody who doesn't have an ego. A lot of human beings don't like to lose face, and anybody brave enough to put on a bite sleeve and get bitten by a big dog, you want that person to put their ego aside and pretend to be afraid, which they're really not. So you have to play act and invoke the dog's prey drive, teach him the mechanics of fighting a human being who's wearing a sleeve. Once the dog understands the mechanics of fighting and winning the sleeve, you then want to develop possessiveness for the sleeve. And then once the dog understands the game, that the object is to bark aggressively to get the sleeve, as the dog matures and has had a lot of training through a lot of repetition, and it's all under a control, it's controlled aggression. It's not aggression that you would find unprovoked. So think of aggression in a protection dog as money. The money is your money. You decide when to spend it, not the dog. In other words, the dog is showing aggression on command as a trained behavior, no differently than it would be taught to sit or to down. It's acting in a pre-programmed way. Through a lot of repetition, it learns the desired sequence of events. So dogs are trained through small steps until the end result is achieved. This idea, first training in prey drive, then invoking defense drive, and then invoking fight drive, and understanding how to train protection, and explaining these three drives, prey, defense, fight drive, these mechanisms of going in an orderly fashion as a progression of training to develop a bite dog for bite sports, which with additional training could become a personal protection dog later in time. This idea of developing biting through prey and as a game for the tug, this idea of approaching it in a systematic fashion, step by step, this wasn't written down as a manual, so to speak, until the Germans got into it. And you want an instinctive action and a trigger stimulus on the dog, and how to invoke an instinctive action and trigger a stimulus and a response, and in a controlled way and in a systematic program of the development of the animal. This idea of doing it in a very logical progression of training, that was first systematized by Dr. Helmut Reiser. And this book is very old. I think this was written in the early 90s. But the idea of prey behavior, then defensive aggression behavior, conditioning the dog to win the game through possession, conditioning the dog to be brave and not fear the helper, and see him as a fighting partner as opposed to an enemy, and much like you would develop a boxer. You know, in a boxing ring, the other boxer is your opponent. He's not your enemy. Your enemy is a soldier putting in a rifle, and you have a rifle. That's shooting to kill. That's an enemy. In a boxing match, he's your opponent. He's not your enemy. So you have to see the helper in the right context. That the dog fighting an opponent, not an enemy. So there's a line there that has to be understood in proper training, and not every dog understands that. But anyhow, the systematic approach of how to do that. If you really, I mean, this is a very old book, and I'm sure some of you have seen so many different protection exercises. But you got to give this book credit where credit is due. Dr. Helmut Reiser, and this is Der Schutzhund, translated from German into English by Armin Winkler, writing the translation from German into English. Excellent book on this topic. Of course, as we go into the modern era, we now head toward a book called Purely Positive Training by Sheila Booth. And she has written other books. And she's a fantastic author. And this book is written with a lot of love and understanding of dogs. And if you don't love dogs and don't understand them, and you're seeing training as a way to exercise your ego, this video is not for you. This book is written, there's no corrections in this book. Now, speaking of corrections, I want to make sure I explain a term that I want to understand. There's something called punishment. Punishment is not to be used in the way we think about punishment with human beings. The lack of giving a reward is a form of punishment in the sense of the dog's training. So punishment can be mean withholding a reward, but punishment can also mean giving a correction. That's a completely different approach to what understanding what punishment means. This book also understands a modern approach to training, which is that behavioral training is done as a series of baby steps. Let me explain what I mean. Suppose my hand was not a human hand, but a robotic hand. And I'm holding this bottle of seltzer water in my hand. And I'm a robot, and I have to pick up this seltzer bottle I'm putting it on my knee instead of the table. Now, if the robotic hand comes across and knocks the bottle over, you get a negative point, right? If the hand comes over and grips the bottle, it gets a positive point. If it grips and crushes, it gets a negative score. If it grips too weak, it won't be able to lift, it gets a negative score. So you're training the robotic hand to lift the bottle of seltzer as a series of approximations. In other words, first come closer to the bottle. You know the phrase, you're getting warmer, you're getting warmer, you're getting warmer? This is how learning theory is accomplished through pure positive training. You are building the idea as a series of small steps where the dog itself learns what you want through inductive reasoning versus you showing it what you want. It learns what you want because it's trying to get the reward, and it's seeking to gain the reward through a series of guesses of what you want. So just like the robotic hand is first taught to come closer to the bottle, reward, plus point. Grip the bottle, plus 2 points. Not crush the bottle, plus 3 points. Lift the bottle. Too fast, you're going to shake up the seltzer water, making it fizz, right? So you want to lift it slowly, right? So if I was to teach a robot to lift a bottle of seltzer, I would teach it to come closer to the bottle, then grip the bottle without crushing it, then lift it slowly as opposed to rapidly. In other words, think of the idea of lifting a water bottle. This is something you take for granted, right? But if you had to teach a robot how to do it, you would have to teach it in that way. You would teach it of not knocking it over, gripping it, not gripping it too strongly, then lifting it, then not holding it too loosely so it drops out of your grip. You see what I mean? Think of that task of teaching a robotic hand to grip a water bottle. And what am I explaining? I'm explaining teaching through a series of approximations. And this idea of breaking an exercise into baby minuscule steps and then piecing the chain together, this idea came from the positive training movement, and this concept is explained in this book. There's also a lot of puppy raising information in this book. For example, you have a puppy and you want it to not have privileges, it has to earn privileges. So first it's attached to your belt buckle on a leash, and you only can be in the kitchen. As its behavior becomes more reliable, it gets more freedom. Now it gets to be in the living room as well, but still wear a leash. As it becomes more reliable still and its behavior is better and better, it gets more privileges. As you slide back in your training, you step back in your privileges. This idea of training not only obedience commands, but training household manners as a series of approximations with privileges earned or revoked over time in a very gradual method. This is basically a lot of what the learning theory is in this book. This book goes into the PREMAC principle, response, responsibility, and reliability. It goes into teaching through getting attention to the handler first. So in the earlier books like Koehler and Conrad Mast, there was no initial phase to gain the dog's attention. You just went out and showed the dog what you wanted, assuming it understood what you wanted. But that's a very human way to think about it. In an animal, first you must gain the dog's attention. And then when it's paying attention to you, Only then it can learn. Think of a child, a 3 or 4-year-old child in class. The kids are throwing airplanes and spitballs and paper in the classroom, and what does the teacher do? First, the teacher must gain control of the class, right? So the kids are listening and attentively listening, and only then the lesson begins on the blackboard, right? Well, the same thing is true of a dog. Think of a 2-year-old child, which is about roughly the intelligence of a dog. It has to first learn to pay attention to you and seek attention from you all the time. Once you've built attention to your face and to your body language, only then you start teaching obedience. This concept of teaching attention first and then teaching obedience, that idea of this particular approach didn't exist until the positive training movement of the 80s. So this book, she wrote another book also. The author's name is Sheila Booth, and I invite you to pick up a copy. And for those who only want to do positive training only without corrections, which I don't believe in, by the way, but you can gain a lot of behavior. The stand, the down, the come, the idea of proactive prevention of certain behaviors. In other words, it's much harder to unteach a behavior that you don't want it to happen than to prevent negative behavior in the first place. So the idea of proactively preventing negative behavior and how to go about it, this is covered in this book as well. So there's a lot of learning theory in this book, and I recommend this book. Of course, we can't talk about training of dogs. This is the advanced book by Ivan Balabanov and Karen Duet. And if you don't know who Ivan Balabanov is, then I don't know where you've been living. He was the world champion so many times I've lost count. So this is the man when it comes to high-level obedience training. So it is as good as it gets when you're getting something from Ivan. This book is not written by Ivan. This book is written by Susan Barwick and Stuart Hilliard. It's called Schutzhund Training Theory and Methods. I suggest you read this book first if you want to get an idea of this dog sport. And and then once you've read this book, this is a more advanced book. It assumes you're already participating in the sport of Schutzhund, and you already know how to teach tracking, you already know how to teach bite work, you already know how to teach obedience at a very high level. This is for the national and international level competitor as opposed to the local club trial person. Now, Ivan focuses on marker training, and this is the next evolution in obedience training, where there's a marker designating the reward, bridging the gap in time between the dog producing the behavior and you reaching into your pocket and giving the reward. See, the association must be made instantly in training an animal. Also, animals are very visually oriented, they're not verbally oriented. So for example, if I teach a sit command and I always do sit and I inadvertently bob my head, the animal is not picking up the word sit. The animal is picking up me bobbing my head every time I say sit. So animals are visual, particularly dogs, they're visual learners, they're not auditory learners. So human beings are auditory learners. Our brain is wired for hearing. They're wired for sight because they're a prey animal. They're a predator, so they are wired for sight more than they are wired for sound. So the way to make sure a dog understands what you want is to turn your back to the dog and say a command and watch in the mirror behind you and see if the dog does a sit or a down with you facing the opposite direction. Then the dog has learned the word and not the body language that you're giving it as a verbal, non-verbal assist. So the dog is picking up on your body language more than it's picking up on the word, because that's how animals learn. So just thought I'd put that in there in case you don't know that. I'm assuming this video is being watched by advanced people as well as beginner people, and this video is more for the beginner than for the advanced person who probably knows all this stuff anyhow. So Ivan's book advanced Schutzhund, teaches all the problems of the retrieve, how to do the dumbbell retrieve. He combines the force retrieve and the motivational retrieve kind of as a method in between both approaches. I'm not going to explain that, I'm going to let you read the book. The idea of how to track a dog and not make it cut corners, the idea of drives. This book is written very clearly. It explains in a given exercise what does the helper do, what does the dog do, and what does the owner do. So it puts the responsibilities in each step on from the perception of the owner, the dog, and the owner, so that it's very clear what you're expecting from each set of eyes, as they say. Because each set of eyes may see the same exercise differently. The owner may see one thing, the dog may understand something else, and yet the helper may see something else entirely. So, same thing is true of the obedience coach. You may not see what he sees because he has more experience. Same thing with tracking. How do you avoid problems? How do you avoid the dog tracking too fast or cutting corners? So there's quite a bit of theory involved in how this is written. It talks about the quadrants of learning. This is really a book on marker training. Now, any good coach will teach you using a variety of techniques, and not every technique will work for every dog. Some dogs will be trained without any compulsion, and they will work at a very high level. But it takes a very high level trainer, somebody like Ivan, to train a dog that way. Most people will not get that kind of reliability without any compulsion. So, what is my position on compulsion and reward-based training? I believe you need both. I don't think anybody who tells you that you can train with a cookie and your dog is lunging at another dog 20 feet away, and you think you can get that behavior to stop with a cookie, I urge you to get a Doberman or a Rottweiler and see how well they're going to do with a cookie, and see how well that works for them. So anybody who is in the pure positive movement, listen, there's nothing wrong with pure positive training. I'm not against it. I simply feel that it's not sufficient and it's not true for every circumstance. There has to be a certain degree of reliability built in through compulsion. As I said, there's a learning phase, there's a distraction and proofing phase, and there's a correction phase in learning behavior. Without these three components, a dog is not considered reliable in off-leash obedience, which is what you want in a competition dog. An off-leash dog that will do the command reliably in any environment, any location, in hot weather, cold weather, windy conditions, non-windy conditions, in a library, in a mall, in a soccer field. In other words, the dog has to work under all circumstances. So why do we bring up all these books and all these topics? Well, to summarize, an untrained dog is a very difficult dog to live with. Part of the beauty of having dogs is to have a dog that is trained and fits into your lifestyle. When you train an animal, you develop a deeper bond with that animal. And understanding the various methods of training and where we have come from the old yank and crank methods, like William Koehler, to less aversive methods like Colonel Conrad Most, that I just explained to you, and then toward a purely positive movement. And then we're going to the marker training, which has a positive and corrections combined after the dog has developed fluency. And then we're going back to corrections and reward-based combined. You may see an advanced trainer use an e-collar and a clicker at the same time. And people say, well, what are you doing? Aren't you a correction-based trainer with using avoidance techniques? Yes. Aren't you a pure positive trainer using a clicker? Yes. In other words, the best trainers combine multiple techniques and they leverage them in a non-abusive way to get results. It is not evil to correct a dog. You're teaching the animal what you want in a very clear way, in a physical way, because the dog gets a correction, a pop on the leash. It understands that, no, I did something wrong. Now you give a correction appropriate to the situation. So if the dog is lunging at another dog or person, you give a level 10 correction. But if the dog looks away from you doing an obedience routine, you give a slight tap to show, hey, hey, over here, over here. So you give a level 1 correction. You know what I mean? In other words, the level of correction is proportional to the circumstances. That's using your head and using intelligence. There's nothing mysterious about dog training. It's not rocket science. It's about proper timing, proper technique, compassion for the animal, but you have to be firm but fair. I would say kind of like a benevolent dictator. But that's not maybe the right phrase. But I think you know what I'm saying. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I will give you links to